Welcome to That RPG Podcast, where every great adventure starts with a single idea. I'm DQ, your friendly neighborhood GM.
I'm Courtney Sables, and I'm not wearing black today.
And I'm Johnny Law, and today I'm so amped to relax.
We have a listener who has a question about downtime, and we could talk about that in our Dear GM. This person is asking, how do I run downtime in a way that's more than just ... everyone awkwardly talking to each other in character? So this is a good question because there are mechanical ways to handle downtime and there are non-mechanical ways to handle downtime. Let's define what downtime is first, I suppose. So downtime in games like Blades in the Dark or some of the other old school games, Shadow Dark is a recent example. In Blades in the Dark, it means pursuing your vices. So you're like playing. Yeah, I haven't played Blades in the Dark, but basically, it's like you're doing the kind of things that your characters are into. It's usually drugs and stuff, shady. And in Shadow Dark, it could be like cruising in the tavern and stuff like that, playing dice games. And other forms of downtime are the kind of thing where you are taking a moment to take stock of what your character's goals and beliefs are and enacting that. So at OSR Plus, we have a number of mechanics that handle downtime. The most commonly used one is called parley, which really just means it's kind of an exploration of the character or the party as a whole, their interiority. So as again, like their goals, their fears, their hopes get discussed. And the way that we do it is by facilitating a conversation. The GM facilitates a conversation. But the key to making it work is giving them something random that spurs the conversation. So we have usually a list of 12 things or 6 things, depending on your list, which you can make as a GM on the fly before the conversation. And you randomly hand out these prompts. So it might be like, we're going to talk about the fears we've had from our childhood cropping up as we venture through this dark forest. That's what the GM will say, meta-narratively. And then he'll give them some random prompts. So maybe in the list, there's something like the overbearing father, or the prompt might be the creature under the bed, or it might be that dark night where I was alone. So those are just like very vague open-ended prompts. And I tend to suggest having a list of a theme and then a list of something tangible. So if the theme is, the overbearing father, the tangible thing might be one shoe lying face up. So it's suggestive of something, right? Like, why is there one shoe? And the player can interpret that however they want. But the whole point is to get their gears turning such that they think of something that relates to their character so they can convey that in character. And I think a lot of the magic of why that works is because I think in the juxtaposition of these two things, and this is my background in like poetry, when you juxtapose two unlike things, suddenly your mind, because we're pattern seeking animals, I was gonna say monsters, we are monsters, we're pattern seeking beings, right? We create a relationship between the two, and then suddenly we can tell a story about it. And I think that sort of juxtaposition is required to create the serendipity, the creative experience that is a parlay or a conversation. And I'll stop there. There's other mechanics we can talk through, but those are the two big uses of a downtime.
Eschewing roles. Can we do a quick one with Courtney and I? I mean, you could use the example you did with the overbearing father if you want, and just.
Okay, so I'm going to say one of you has the overbearing father. One of you has lost at school. That's the two tangibles, so you can choose which one you want, or the two thematic ones. And the two tangibles, I'm going to say one shoe turned upwards, and then for the other one, a broken water fountain.
Courtney, can I add on to this? Should we pick characters from our repertoire to use this so we like have something to draw from?
I feel like, yeah, that makes the most sense.
You want to do Abs and Mal? You want to do something else?
Could do that. Let's do that. Yeah.
Let's make it more medieval then, because they come from. So let's say a broken fountain, and then alone in the church at night, and then the overbearing father, and I don't know what the other one was. And usually what I'll do is I'll give them to the players. I will have talked about what the subject matter is. So in this case, the subject matter is going to be your fears from childhood cropping up on this journey.
Through woods, right?
Yes, through the woods. And I'm going to hand it over to the players. Now they're in the woods, and they're having these conversations as they're journeying.
I would say, like, with Absla, she is brought back to a time when she was first brought to the city by her mother. So she was still quite young because she had grown up out on the ocean with her father. So in this city with all these walls that maybe she's not used to being surrounded by, and in this Mora church, like the church of her people, maybe it was like one night she couldn't sleep. So she was kind of wandering around on her own, poking around, and was just like really caught off guard by the silence and the stillness, because living on a ship, used to the motion and the ocean smells and everything, and there was none of that there, and all that there was this like broken, worn down fountain that hadn't been taken care of. Maybe it's been smashed by city guards at some point, like the Imperials came in and broke it because they saw it as like some sort of heathenistic worshipping going on, and there's just like a slow drip of water coming from that, and that's like all that breaks the silence and in this dark echoing church. And it made her feel very alone and like she wasn't where she should be. And then carrying that into like the present of walking through a forest, maybe it's like she gets this feeling of like, I shouldn't be here, this isn't right.
You hear the trickling of water, I assume, in the forest.
Yeah, maybe it's like a stream somewhere further on that sets her on edge, because it brings her back to that time when she was this helpless like 5-year-old girl.
And see, that part of that is the immersion, right? Like by listening to that, the other players are now feeling what she's projecting as a character, and now you're feeling more in the woods and alone.
I know there would be followed up by an amazing monologue from you, but you
Yes,
just
yeah.
dropped that.
Yeah.
So yeah, overbearing father, upturned shoe, single shoe. My thought would be that, maybe I would even piggyback if this actually happened in this order, that I'm noticing that Absala is on edge and maybe checking with the rest of the party on edge, and Mal feeling like he's got to protect everyone physically, um, that he's got to get everything right, and maybe he would start overcorrecting a little bit walking through this forest, and he would think back. So Mal was an orphan. He had a father. It was an abbot of sorts. It was a priest, and that would beat him and put him in small spaces. But maybe that was a thing about, he, at the end of his day, he would kick off his shoes, and even though he did everything right that day, he didn't correct his shoes and put them in. And it's just that thought of like leaving that one thing turn the wrong way, and the overbearing father would rouse him from his sleep and start beating him because you're great all day, but why aren't your shoes in the right spot? Why is one upturned? But yeah, so that would be, but just from that, like, this to step back out of it, like, this, it came from two characters that Courtney and I played together, and DQ has GM'd, but this is not something we ever talked about. Like, there's things that, yeah, there are things that we glazed over, but like instantly I know exactly what you're talking about, and I know, and I can get in your character's head a little bit because I've played for years now at this point with her, and a lot, whatever. How many episodes? 50? No, 30.
I
30
don't know,
something.
30, yeah,
33 or something.
34,
Yeah, it's a
35.
lot.
But even so, if we've
And
never heard of these characters, I already have a sense of who you both are.
but and that's exactly that. It's if there's a new player entering with us, like I think that kind of concept would be like, oh, okay, this is the game, like this is the vibe we're giving off, and that's um to branch off this a little bit. I remember the first downtime I ever played. It was one of our earliest OSR Plus games that actually was OSR Plus. Um, and just being given the ability to have like these cool prompts and like this like kind of structure to it, but then also to be able to interact with the NPC, and to like, it's cool to like talk to other players and kind of flesh that out, but to actually be able to delve into the GM's mind via their characters, like, that was so cool. I remember just Mr. Lone and Captain Vina. Yeah. Like, and it was like, I thought like, she's such a bad, like I want to hang out with her. And I got to. And like that was such a cool thing. And like it wouldn't, if it was in a conversation in a group, it wouldn't have happened that way. And with the prompt, it made it more focused, and it made me like take more leaps, I guess. But like I literally, this happened 6 years ago, and I can almost remember it like it was yesterday, because I just it stuck out as this awesome moment of like, I want to know what she's about. Like what's her deal? Why is she here? What's her, why is she with this guy with a broken neck? Like what, like
And it goes in two directions too. Like when you're asking me questions, I don't know everything about this character, but as you're probing me, I'm putting those things together in my mind to make it make sense. I think back into like what inspired me. Like on the one hand, the games we played with Rob too, he liked to do. He didn't have it structured the same way, but he would have kind of open-ended prompts. And as we saw in World Build with us, he loves those kind of open-ended prompts. So I borrowed that, but also like going back further, in undergrad, taking all those poetry courses, which did not help me. However, they did spiritually help me. Right? There you go. Because my mentor was a poetry professor, Terry Whittick. You should go check out her poetry books. And I remember one of the first classes I had with her was I think it was Intro to Literary Studies. And she started by just talking about, I think there was literally a pencil. This is like so cliche. There was a pencil in the ceiling stuck up there that someone had thrown up there, which is like out of a movie, right? And she pointed to it. We all looked up at it. And she started talking about like, how do we get this? She didn't say this, but this is what she was doing is how do we get from this pencil to the whole world? Like, how do we get from the meaning of what this pencil is doing in the ceiling and why it's there to something broader and bigger than this school and the country, to something that's about the spirit of the soul of humanity? And she did that over the course of like 20 minutes by expanding and expanding the relationship between this pencil and this room, and then this room and the school, and keeping going outward. And I feel like that's what I mean by juxtaposition. You never know where meaning lies until you start putting unlike things together. And that's part of the magic, to repeat myself, that's part of the magic of taking these prompts, which on themselves don't mean anything. When they're together, then plus your character, you suddenly get something out of it. And I think if we can achieve that in an RPG, that's where immersion happens. And for me, immersion means losing a sense of the world and being fully in the simulation.
Yeah. Yeah, I love downtime in games, obviously, these two now. But like those prompts too are really cool because they give you something really unexpected to work with, like something you've probably never thought of before. And it's like, okay, how do I take my character and mesh it with this concept that I just heard about like a minute ago and make a story out of that? And you can come up with some really, really interesting things from that and like get such a better sense of the character and their background. And it feels a lot more fulfilling than like doing what I used to do, which is write like essays worth of backstory that, never got used. But in this case, it's more like just on the spot coming up with something. Like maybe it'll never get used again, but maybe you'll be able to reference it and call back to it later on.
You did exactly that. What I think with Fear and a Handful of Dust, it was a tag made by someone else, but you incorporated it later on into play, because of a monologue that happened earlier. So these callbacks happen. We talk about downtime. There's mechanical effects. Usually, when we do parlay action, it can yield things like a bond tag. So it's like an advantage that can be used between the two players. And there's other meta narrative sort of benefits you could apply. You could give them a fate point. I'm very stingy with that, but you can do things like that. Then there's other mechanics. That's one. That's parlay. The other two, which are very similar, or not similar to parlay, but similar to each other, is in my Wizard Plus called journey and montage. So when you do journey, the idea is, think of like Lord of the Rings when the party is traveling across the landscape and you have 50 pages of Tolkien describing grass, right? So in play, we want that to be exciting. So that journey is conducted in what I call abstract time, meaning, and not what I call, but what has been called abstract time, meaning it's not like happening in the real time of play. It's happening over some gulf of time that the GM is alighting across. So when you have abstract time like that, what you do is you let the players construct the journey with you. And it's done in a similar way as a parlay, in that there are prompts constructed and there are complications and benefits that come out of it. And I don't want to get too in the weeds of how it's actually conducted in terms of the rolling, but the idea is that each of the players is contributing something to the journey. And then we actually play out what happened in that contribution in a very abstract single roll sort of thing. I think we did this to a large degree in Great White North, where in between each like adventure component in Quest of Queens, in Tarth Quest. I said Great White North because it takes place in the same place. Yeah. But in between the journey that they're taking, the locations they're going to, there were these journeys in unknown territory. So instead of the GM spending so much time creating all that stuff, he presents a list of prompts, and he has it prepared certain penalties that can happen based on the environment and benefits that can be taken away based on what they'll need throughout their journey. And then the players are given those prompts. They construct the actual danger they encounter, and the GM executes like getting over that danger with them. So now they have total ownership in the journey.
So I jump in on that real quick, just as a from my perspective of being part of these. Yeah, in Tarth Quest, in an offshoot of Quest of Queens, we were in a magical labyrinth that it felt like years. Spoilers, we felt like years. It wasn't years, it was like months that were in there. But you had these long journeys, and they literally took like over years. Like, and we had like children being born, and we had or being conceived at least, and like major things happening. And it all it was is DQ rolling a couple of dice and giving us prompts, and like kind of setting someone off as the lead, and then everyone else kind of filled in on their little bits in the prompt, and just then we went from there. God Beyond the Portal, you did a smaller version of that when we were running down the alleys in that other world, and like we ran into like there was like a cart in the middle, and like it was a thing, and the same thing. It was like there's a problem, and it's not like there's a problem. Everyone rolled dice, what abilities you have, but it was like how does this affect you overall, and it was more of a it wasn't as much of an encounter as it was an experience. Like I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. Because it's not like yielding, you're not like rolling for damage or hit attacking each other. It's usually handled in a success check, meaning there are going to be complications. The question is, do you get out clean or do you get out permanently changed in some way? You know?
Similarly, and this is kind of going off of downtime, but in the same vein though. But I was trying to play around with that a little bit in Great White North with a couple of the initial rooms that you guys found in Labyrinth were constructed by you. I told you there was some sort of thing, but I was like, tell me more about the room, and you guys actually made the problems. Like I did not say there's a pit of alligators in a pool. Someone else said that.
Oh my God, I didn't even realize that.
Yeah, no, that was all that, and then the steam room, which was like the
Oh
pipes.
yeah,
This
we
is
did lure that one
yeah,
together.
so that one was like that was very like theater of the mind, 100%. Well, they were both theater of the mind, but the other one, literally, you guys you set all the traps for the. I didn't. Was like, all right, I'll let you do it, and this is literally coming from your like dungeon crawl like handbook is what I was trying. I'm not doing that anymore. I want to try it. I want to like try it, see how it's for a full campaign. It's a little bit too much. Like for a dungeon, it's fantastic. But like the fact that you didn't realize I was using your own on you is pretty cool. So that means it works really well. And it was just you guys. It was just you have to be able to riff. You have to be able to like have general ideas of what you can do and what the other people can do and what you want to have be the end goal at least, but the journey there. And that I feel like for the downtimes, for those kind of not your simple downtimes, not your actual chilling downtimes, but your montages and whatnot. Like I think it's that you know what the end goal they should reach, and you let your players kind of decide what that framework is, and then fill in the gaps.
Yeah, and speaking of like riffing off of each other and kind of knowing what everybody else can do, like I do really want to emphasize the point of like downtime for players, for like the play group itself, and like getting to know your fellow players and the GM, and not just showing up right when the game starts and then leaving and then not talking at all until the next session and so on. But like it's good to just get to know the people that you're playing with, and I probably wouldn't have done certain things in games if I wasn't as comfortable with the group that I was playing with, because you can get like really vulnerable, especially in downtimes. Like the things that you talk about can be like really heavy and intense, and that probably wouldn't happen if this was just like a game that you barely knew the people in and had no connection to them outside. But because we're like good friends, it's a lot easier to get into that mindset of like being very vulnerable and exposed and kind of enjoying that riffing on each other's ideas.
When you want to be mindful of bleed is kind of what you're getting at
Yes.
too, is
Yeah.
that like bleed will happen, especially if you're doing these deep psychological kind of exercises, and knowing your players helps as a GM, especially to not mitigate, but like manage bleed, I guess. Like the other, just to be complete about the mechanics, we talked about journey montage, which was mentioned a few times. It's very similar to journey. The difference is that the player has a goal. So maybe they're trying to reforge the magic sword, or they're trying to find the artifacts in the great dungeon, but you don't want to play all of that out over 15 sessions. So you want to execute it quickly. So that's the kind of thing where you, just like with abstract time, you can do it. So in that case, you're creating holds over time, meaning points of success towards what you want to achieve. But the player, it's a downtime because the player is invested in creating this thing that's happening between actual play that we're doing, and the next actual play that we're doing with all the party. And then one that's one of you guys' favorites, which is very similar to parlay, is called the monologue. And I think this one's pretty. I mean, I haven't read enough systems to rule out that this is not in others, but monologue is the idea that in every fantasy movie I've seen, or sci-fi movie, whatever, there's always the protagonist gives this impassioned plea, or rallies the troops or whatever, and it's that critical cinematic moment. And so monologues are meant to capture or to reward the player for doing that. So usually it results in story tags that can be used throughout the game and invoked later to show their effects on the world. And we've had that happen where someone will give a monologue, it'll generate those story tags, and then someone uses the tags later on, and it makes perfect sense, because they've been impacted.
Did you get to the part, Courtney and Murderbot, where he says speech, or he's like speech, speech, speech?
Yes. Yeah. That was an excellent
I can't remember what I was
monologue,
supposed to be like. I'm here to protect you.
and that is my job.
So,
Yes.
yes,
And they're
it's
like,
my job.
"Yeah."
That's it. It's like the worst monologue ever. Yeah, I mean, well, the thing, so monologuing obviously is not, you do not create the concept of it, and it's not in even in gaming, I'm sure, but usually the GM that monologues more than players. But I do think the concept of rewarding monologuing is newer, at least as far, I mean, I haven't played every system, far from it. But like it seems like it's very much I've never come across it. Let's put it that way. And the fact that not only in OSR Plus can you reward monologuing, but you can then wager on it and try to get more off of it, which is that's just that more, it gamifies it, which is really fun. But DQ, where is there a place that the listeners can go and look at some of these rules for downtime?
Of course. Sorry, I was looking for the questions that commenter was Kristen Glow was asking. Yes, if you're looking for the full rules text, this is all online on osrplus.com. If you go to, I think it's under the Game Master's Guide, because these are usually Game Master facing rules. If you want to see exactly how they're executed. I mean, the other thing too that people typically think about as downtime is like when you're leveling up or when you're resting. We don't like, that's purely a mechanical thing. But what you can do in those contexts is run a parlay if you want to when they're resting, or run monologues. Maybe the monologues while you're resting, or you're sitting in front of a fire and you're all telling stories about your past. That's a way of doing monologues, and rewarding the players. And then leveling up, like when they level up, if you wanted to turn that into a montage, for example, you could. Like maybe when they level up, you have to montage how they gain their skill, and you play through that. That's all ways you can, spice up those
Especially
effects.
if it's like a milestone level up, like they just finished something major, so that you could say like, what do you take back from that, or like, you know, like the end of Andor, like what happens now elsewhere in the world, and they can do that. Um, I do love the idea though too that not punishing your players, but asking more from them. If they're like, I want to rest, I want to rest, I want to rest, and like, sure, of course, you got to find somewhere safe, but okay, also what happens now? Like, what happens within this group? Well, not like cost, but like what put effort into it. It's not just go to sleep and you get your MP back. Like, I mean, sometimes you want to do that because you know exactly what to do next. But if they're kind of like wandering through the forest, or like they try to find shelter, that is a perfect time to take advantage of that scenario and make it weigh something. Like it really, like it sticks out in your mind as both a player and a GM when you start hitting those points, and they're very cinematic. They're very, they're the slow middle part of the movie that all the meat and all the feeling is in. It's where the Academy Awards are handed out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it creates some kind of like cadence of a rhythm where like instead of, going from combat to like a really quick rest to doing more combat or like more intensive stuff, you have time to like decompress from whatever combat you just went through. And like I feel like in plenty of other RPGs, maybe they don't necessarily treat combat as like severe or impactful, or it's just seen as like, oh, you just, slash some goblins to death, like whatever. But if you want it to have like emotional impacts, then it's good to have time afterwards for people to actually talk about it and talk about what happened. And it could even just be like talking about tactics that, oh, we fucked up in this fight, we should do something different next time. But it can also be like the emotional aspects of it, like I didn't like fighting those people because like I used to be one of them or something like that.
And it's a great point too. Like I feel like it's very swingy in TTRPGs. There's either like, your 5e or your Pathfinder where it's like combat that just happens all the time and you want it to happen all the time because that's like how it's balanced. Or you have things like Call of Cthulhu or whatever that are like combat's really dangerous and like you should avoid it at all costs, whatever. But like to have that middle ground where like combat happens, it's not unusual for us, but at the same time, it does leave like you can have PTSD. And you can things can happen out of that. And I will say another kind of like tangential thing it's very useful is sessions I've ended on combat. It's cool to start the next session with kind of it could be a downtime. It could actually be like a laid out down, but also just kind of a downtime amongst the players in a meta sense, like a war council style. We're doing a lot with another game that we're DQ and I are in. But where you just kind of like, where are we right now? And like, how are your people feeling? And like the Great White North, we realized that when David's character Yvonne killed his first human, and like it's this big tough guy and he kills beasts like no problem, but he killed his first human. I was like, oh, like I like listening to the recording. I was like, that's a huge deal. He just cut a guy in half. He's never done that in his life. Like he's done plenty of beasts, but never another human being. So like, okay, like that we should probably go back and talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, and to be clear, like this is a certain play style, right? Like we're trying to create immersion, we're trying to dive deeper into like the narrative effect of all these things. You can certainly play a dungeon crawl and be divorced from your character's interiority, and who cares what they're thinking, and just play it that way. But that's not what our system's about. So if that's not what you want, then you don't want to play our system.
But if that's not what you want, and you still write a 5-page backstory, fuck you. Like just go write a book. Just go write a book. Just get out of here.
And I think we've answered Gluax and Commissar Whisker's other questions. Gluax had a question about, well, so this was in our Discord. I had asked like, hey, do you have any questions about downtime in general? And they asked, like, Gluax was asking, well, how much do you force? I think this is fair paraphrasing. How much do you force the PCs to do this interior work? And I think we've answered that in that you're not really forcing them so much as you're giving them prompts that they're choosing what they want to do with it. Is that fair to say, I think, for him?
And that's what I hate with 5e. Like you can do downtime, you can like try to like craft things, but even that's like it's shitty how they like approach it. And like it really like it I felt like it always stifled my characters. Like I feel like I should be doing more when we're not doing everything. Like I
It's because I think it's like, I don't want to fault 5e. Like it's being used as a multi-tool when it's not. You know what I mean? Like, so it's used for all these different types of play styles, but it's one type of play. It's mechanics serve one play style.
yeah, it's definitely it's a war like tactical game first, and then with little bits of exploration and social combat.
So people just like bolt on all this stuff, and, you know.
Cool. We good with that?
Yeah, I think we're good on our Dear GM.
And if you like the idea of, downtime heavy games and really like character interior work, then check out OSR Plus. By all means, join the Discord and we can try to slot you into a game.
Thanks for listening to That RPG Podcast, where every great adventure starts with a single idea. Join us next week for more from our series Downtimes and Dungeons, where we talk about Fire and Fable Studios' first encounter RPG, how to run immersive downtimes in play, and build a Greek mythology-themed adventure set in a dying Earth dystopia.